Trump wants to breathe life into a nuclear industry that has been plagued by burdensome regulations, cost overruns, and delays. To speed the development of new nuclear designs, he signed Executive Order 14301, which removed the design review by experts at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC, for the development of test reactors. In the past, a company had to prove a reactor was safe to the NRC before it could be built. Now, a company that wants to build a novel nuclear reactor can just go ahead with no expert review. They only have to talk to the Department of Energy, and they're looking at criteria like technological readiness, site evaluations, financial viability, and a detailed plan to achieve criticality. Notice anything missing, like safety? Their goal is to have reactors achieve criticality by July 4th, 2026. So now speed is paramount rather than safety. And the experts at the NRC are shut out of the process. Now, there was no question the process needed to be fixed. NuScale is the only company to have an innovative design approved, and by their telling, they spent over $500 million and over 2 million labor hours to develop the information needed to prepare its design certification application. The company also submitted 14 separate topical reports in addition to the over 12,000 pages for its DCA, and provided more than 2 million pages of supporting information for the NRC audits. The process occurred over 6 phases, and they have yet to build a reactor, and it's not clear they ever will. There are 10 companies that have projects taking advantage of EO 14301. I'm going to dive deep on one of those companies, Valar Atomics, and how I think this EO will impact their development. Like most of these companies, they're a startup working on a small modular reactor powered by TRISO fuel with between $100 and $200 million of investments. If you don't know what a small modular reactor and TRISO fuel are, you can check out my video on Kairos Power. Valar's approach, a Pebble Bed Reactor cooled with helium and using graphite as a moderator, was first researched in earnest in South Africa about 30 years ago, but none have ever been built. The approach has some advantage over a pressurized light water reactor that make up the majority of the world's nuclear reactors, like high output temperature, and is thought to be a safe approach, as it's not a high pressure vessel like a pressurized water reactor. And the TRISO fuel is encapsulated by a mini containment vessel. It's an unproven approach, but not a bad one. Valar Atomics is led by Isaiah Taylor, a 20-something high school dropout who's founded 2 companies already, an auto shop in Idaho and an IoT company that has since gone out of business. He has no formal education in nuclear engineering or physics or experience developing complex hardware products. But maybe his team is very deep to compensate for his lack of experience in education. Well, it doesn't look that way to me. Looking at LinkedIn and their website, I find 7 people with the title of nuclear engineer, about half of whom don't have degrees in that field, and only 1 has a PhD. Most of them are fairly early in their careers or come from a failed nuclear startup, which is where the chief nuclear officer spent the previous 7 years. Do they have a strong quality and risk culture? If so, it's not clear who's in charge of it, as there's no director or chief of making sure nothing terrible happens. This is something that I would expect of a company working in this field. And in looking at their team, I uncovered a piece by the Utah Investigative Journalism Project about Kip Mock, their head of operations and president of Ward 1, their subsidiary building a nuclear power prototype in the Philippines. It seems that he put old diesel fuel into a wood-burning stove and it blew back, sending one of his employees to the hospital with serious burns. And this wasn't decades ago, but in 2021. So there's a data point about their quality and risk culture. By comparison, Kairos, who's developing a similar reactor, has 86 employees under the filter nuclear engineer in LinkedIn, which is more than all of the employees at Valar. They have directors of reliability and quality. One could argue that a right-sized, innovative nuclear power company would be smaller than Kairos, and its bloated headcount was driven by unreasonable regulatory requirements. One could argue. But it's hard to say that 7 nuclear engineers are sufficient to design a reactor of a type that has never been built. Their first prototype mimicked the heat of the nuclear reactions with a lot of electricity and was built in LA. This was a sensible first prototype. Rather than get NRC approval for their second reactor, which will have a thermal power of about 100 kilowatts generated by nuclear fission, they're going to build it in the Philippines, a country with no nuclear reactors. And they sued the NRC, claiming that the low-power test reactor shouldn't be subjugated to design review. Now that EO 14301 has been signed, this lawsuit might be moot. Thanks to the executive order, their third prototype will be built in Utah, and they still haven't had even a discussion with the NRC about safety or any outside review of their design by appropriate experts. You can make a pretty good case that given the low power and the selection of TRISO fuel, these reactors are low risk. But if you're going to have no external design review, I'd feel better if they had a strong team, which they definitely don't. Will the reactor vessel have accelerated aging due to neutrons? Probably. How fast? I don't know, and I'm not confident they know. Will the TRISO fuel break down due to high temperature? Probably not, but they're operating at 900 C compared to 300 C for most nuclear reactors. So maybe. What happens if oxygen leaks into the reactor? I have no idea. It might be bad. How likely is this? Also, no idea, but it might be possible. Questions like this come up during a failure mode and effects analysis, where all possible failure modes are considered, and ones that have a high probability or severity require some form of mitigation. This is the kind of work that would be required by the NRC. Looking at their team, I don't see the depth to do this analysis and have an independent review in-house. So will the streamlined process of EO 14301 provide Valar a path to success that NuScale has failed to find? Is NuScale's lack of success to date caused by the NRC's slow and expensive review process? You can make a reasonable case that it didn't help, but I suspect that the prime reason they have yet to see success is that SMRs are inherently expensive until you achieve the economies of scale that come with high volume. So if you have orders for 10 reactors, it's tough to get the investment needed to build a factory that will let you bring down the prices. It was cost that hampered NuScale's success. If the cost of getting NRC approval was $100 million rather than $500 million, that would have helped bring down the cost, but it's not clear that it would be sufficient. That's the problem with the concept of small modular reactors. Here's what Valar's Isaiah Taylor explained to a reporter on why SMRs lead to safety.
I think what's most important is you want to actually build plants often and you want to iterate and innovate, right? So how do we drive down the safety curve in a technology? Take cars, for example. Cars are a lot safer today than they were 60 years ago, right? The death rates on a car crash are far, far lower than in the 1960s. And what has driven us down that curve is innovation. And the way that you drive down that curve is you continue making new models and making them better every year. And so a safe nuclear industry is a nuclear industry that continues making reactors. It makes them often, and it also makes them smaller in a repeatable format because it's actually easier to innovate, right? If your reactor is something that you produce every week, you're constantly looking at it, figuring out how do you improve it, how do you make it safer. So innovation is going to drive that safety even more than trying to sit there for a very long time and create the perfect piece of paper that describes a perfect nuclear power plant in theory. It's actually better to make a small reactor that's very safe and make many of them.
So much to unpack here. First, cars are safer because of federal regulations. Did you know that most cars didn't have seatbelts until the government required them? And crumple zones, and airbags, and drunk driving laws. Most of the increase in safety came from regulations and government action, not company led innovation. Isaiah Taylor says that iterations will allow them to reach a better design than review on paper, but this ignores an important difference between nuclear energy and software, his previous industry. A critical failure in an early design might lead to something like Fukushima, and that's just not acceptable. And how much risk society takes should not be decided solely by people who have a financial motive to move forward with a risky design. Also, there are other countries with strong nuclear industries with different regulatory regimes: Japan, Russia, China, South Korea, and France, to name a few. And most of the nuclear reactors built in other countries look a lot like the AP1000s that were just built in Georgia. 1 gigawatt scale pressurized water reactors. Of the 35 reactors in China under construction, 32 are pressurized water reactors with at least a gigawatt of capacity. One is a small modular reactor, and 2 are breeder reactors, which I talked about in my video about natrium. In other words, the country with the most aggressive nuclear power build out doesn't see the volume to justify small modular reactors. So I think most of the companies participating in this streamlined process will fail, not because the new process is bad, but because the economics of SMRs just doesn't pencil out. A 1 gigawatt plant is cheaper than 20, 50 megawatt plants. And we would be better off figuring out how to build these large plants more cheaply and quickly. And that's what's holding back nuclear, not the need for new tech. But I don't think anything terrible is going to happen from building these test reactors. We should find a way to speed innovative designs like Valar's and the other companies that I've covered that I think are more likely, but still unlikely, to succeed. So what should a simplified NRC process look like? I don't know, but I'm certain that requiring just phase 1 of 6 to build a test reactor would be better than removing all reviews, as Trump has done. This would reduce the risk and give startups like Valar the advantage of a review by experts with decades of experience that they don't have in-house. I like the idea of building something and learning from that, but you also need the paper review so you have some confidence that you're building the right thing. And it's cheaper and safer to fix things in paper than in the physical world. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we should improve the process for encouraging innovation in the nuclear industry. Or should we even bother, as wind plus solar plus batteries plus long distance transmission is the way to go, if you ask me. And if you'd like to support my channel, you can buy me a coffee, or even better, watch more of my videos on nuclear fission. And please forward this video to everyone you know who supports nuclear power.